Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to the Gangstalking series. This is video 2. I hope everyone had a chance to check out video 1 before proceeding to this video, because if not, you might be a little lost as to how I got into this topic. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about gangstalking tactics and what all that might look like, not only from my point of view, but from other tactics that have been observed and clinically documented throughout all the time, honestly. So stay tuned and buckle up, get your popcorn, get your refreshments, because this video is going to be loaded with information. All right, so let's get right into it. Gang stalking tactics. Typically, stalking is something that's carried out by a singular individual. However, there are instances where that can be carried out by proxy or mobbing. Proxy stalking, gang stalking, is carried out by other individuals instead of the particular stalker. Some examples of the individuals who could participate in this form of stalking are family members, neighbors, children, pets, strangers, and authority figures. Mobbing is when a group of individuals gang up on and harass one victim. So, for example, if the stalker, for whatever reason, refuses to carry out the stalking on their own, maybe they're a prominent figure in society and they don't want their name being attached to these, despicable acts. So they use someone else that may be close to them to do their dirty work for them. You know, for example, in the case of my personal experience, I've had stalking conducted against me carried out by, neighbors, children, pets. I know is a really weird one, but let me explain. People were using their pets as a form of, antagonizing me. And I say this because there are instances where my family and I would go out and about to public places, and all of a sudden these people would come out of nowhere with their pets, like trying to, I guess, use them as a form of intimidation or to scare us or scare me or whatever. But what they fail to realize is I'm not afraid of animals, specifically dogs in this case that I'm speaking of. I grew up around many animals. I've had a horse in my lifetime, turtles, cats, dogs, you name it. I had it growing up. I'm pretty much a country girl, so animals don't scare me. But I feel like because there's that, tie to, racism and stuff of not so good people using animals against people of hue as a form of violence. I feel like that's what their end game was. Again, I could be reaching, but this is just the dots that my mind connected and why every time I would go out somewhere with my family, these were the type of individuals we were encountering. My family and I even had our first Karen experience with a lady at a public park who saw me and my family playing soccer in an area that I guess her and her friends in the neighborhood had deemed the dog area, even though it wasn't a dog park. Um, Pretty much allowed her dogs to harass me and my sons while we were playing soccer. And essentially, she was letting them off leash. Now, where where we were, it was a on leash park, meaning all animals had to be on a leash. However, she wasn't respecting those rules and allowed her two big labs, or excuse me, golden retrievers to come after my son's ball. Like every time we kicked the ball, they'd run up from wherever she was and essentially start biting on our ball. And I remember holding my foot on my ball until she came and retrieved her animals. And I didn't get it at first. I didn't understand why, she was seemingly being aggressive towards me and my family when we're just like every other family out there. We were just out there playing, we weren't bothering anyone, we actually were off to ourselves. And that's pretty much how we tend to operate when we go out. in places like that, we tend to stay to ourselves, stay in our own little lane, and not bother anyone. But she allowed her dogs to continue to harass us while we were playing. And she had made some statements along the lines of, oh, well, my dogs are used to coming over here during a certain time throughout the day to train with me. And it's like they're wondering, hey, what are you doing here? Now, in that moment, I instantly caught on to what she meant. She was just using her dogs as an excuse to basically say, hey, what are you and your family doing here specifically? But again, last time I checked, it's a public park in which everyone is welcome. But it ended up it didn't end up escalating, in my opinion, to the point where, any words were exchanged, but I just basically like laughed at it. I was like, oh, I get it, haha, whatever. But she continued with that behavior because my husband and I were switching back and forth playing with our sons. One of my sons was riding a scooter. My other son and I were just kicking the ball around into the goals that we brought for ourselves, just minding our business. And after that interaction, magically she gets on the phone and all of these other people with dogs all of a sudden start showing up, elderly, young, old, you name it. And we're just kind of like, okay. So my husband and my sons and I pretty much made the executive decision, decide, hey, we're just going to go ahead and move down because I had said it out loud. I was like, obviously, I'm getting the hint that, they don't want us here, that, they don't want us in this area, which I thought, was kind of weird to, you're basically a grown woman bullying a family playing with their children. Now, mind you, I don't have littles. My children aren't like 3 and 5. However, the sentiment remains the same. We're just here minding our business, not bothering you or your animals. We never stopped you or your animals from doing what you were doing. But I remember overhearing her alluding something about, oh, it's hard to train you guys today because of all the distractions in the scooter. And I'm like, well, mind you, you're at a park where children play, and there were other children playing because the park, the way that it was structured, is like there's a upper grassy area that's outside of the fence in area that has the actual play equipment, and then there's the second portion of the park that had the play equipment and like sidewalk or walking track that you could walk around the park. And my family and I were playing outside of that because it was a sloped area, and we were just, like I said, kicking the soccer ball around. We didn't want to, bother anyone inside the little fenced in area because at the time when we arrived, there was no one playing in the area that we settled on. There was no one there. There also were benches around, so I can see why now the dog owners, I guess, may have wanted to keep that area just to themselves. But again, based on the laws, there was nothing that we were doing that was wrong. So instead of, making it into some whole big thing, we just decided to, pack up our stuff and go back down to the other part of the park. And I remember my son saying to her, dogs are supposed to be on a leash, right? And like, because he pointed to the sign at the park. And the girl couldn't say anything because this was a young lady. She, probably her early 20s or whatever. And like I said, the other individuals that arrived, they never said anything to us, but they also started letting their dogs off leash. And I remember a couple of the dogs actually running up to me and my family, which is crazy because we weren't even like interacting with them, and I didn't touch anyone's animal. But I just thought it was interesting that their dogs seemingly didn't even want to be around them, that they automatically gravitated towards me and my family, which, is not uncommon for us. But I don't know, that whole situation. I didn't originally think too much more of it than, hey, we just had our first Karen experience. And again, we could have turned it into something more, but we didn't. We just chose to take the higher road. And I just explained to my children, I said, see, this is what privilege looks like when you believe that even as an adult that you get to have say so and claim over something that doesn't even belong to you. And in my situation, I thought, hey, if this person would have been respectful and just would have asked us politely, like, hey, do you guys mind, like, even though me and my family didn't owe her anything of the sort, but even if she would have been polite and be like, hey, do you mind moving down, or do you mind, like, hey, or can you let me know when you guys are going to be done? We typically try here. Would have been no big deal at all. But she made it into a big deal. I guess her boyfriend showed up because I remember him coming with another dog, and he sat down and just, was like observing everything. But you could tell it was supposed to be a show of intimidation, and my family is a multiracial family. I myself am quote unquote black. My husband is a Cuban man, and of course my, racially mixed children. And most of the individuals that showed up were Caucasian, and some were Asian. And so we just kind of got the vibes like, oh, we're not welcome here, even though, again, it's a public park. This isn't your, someone's backyard that we just popped up in and just chose to play. Like, no, it's a public park. And we had several other instances that occurred like that at local parks in and around the area that we were residing at that time. But yeah, like proxy stalking and harassment is a real thing, because my thing is with her, why did she feel the need to call backup against a family that meant her no harm? Even when her dogs were attacking my kid's ball, we never was like, hey, get your stinking dogs or any nothing. We were just, like I said, I kept my foot on the ball so that her dog didn't ultimately run off of my ball, because he was really gnawing into it. And of course, I could have been like, hey, you owe me a new soccer ball, if your dog punches my ball. But I didn't do any of that, because it wasn't that serious to us. Like, we were just there trying to have, a good time and just enjoying ourselves. And I guess that really just bugged her, because the whole time she was supposed to be training her animals, she was, staring back at me and my family. Like, every couple of minutes I'd look over and she's like staring over her shoulder, like, I guess growing impatient. And it just really goes to speak to the volume of, childish adults that we have running around parading in adult bodies, uh, to pick on a family. Just because I don't look like you doesn't mean that my family's family time isn't special and important to me too. But anyway, yeah, so that's a perfect example of proxy stalking slash harassment, because it got to the point that anytime my family and I returned to this part, then magically some of these same characters would show up with their dogs, or would, pretty much just try to cause a disturbance with us when we were just simply minding our business and not bothering anybody. Um, and I can just think of every time that we went back, it was the same type of vibe, the same type of energy, even though, again, we were the ones who had been, victimized essentially. But I don't look at myself or my family as victims. We're survivors of a lot. We're fighters too. So it's that whole situation where it's like, I could teach my boys to be afraid of instances like that, or people that we encounter like that, or we can continue to show up and let these people know that you can't bully us from a space that belongs to everyone, and we do have a right to be here. So that's just one example of some of the proxy slash like mobbing type of stalking that we dealt with during that situation. All right, gang stalking tactics continue. So another version would be no touch torture, which is committing non-criminal acts that still cause mental duress, all without physically touching the victim. This can also be accomplished by proxy and mobbing. And a little bit of what I gave to you guys in my example could also be seen as no touch torture, because essentially the act that's being committed isn't necessarily a crime, meaning that the person, or in this case myself, I couldn't, call the police like, hey, they're using their dogs to harass me, unless there's an actual true emergency where if a dog bit myself or my kid or something, then yeah, that'd be grounds for calling the police or whatever. But this could also look like noise disturbances, like if you're in your home and you have a stalking neighbor that every time you come outside, they're honking their horn, or they are waiting outside for you every day. You get what I'm saying? Like it's stuff that they're not. It's like that whole, like how siblings do, like, oh, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. It's essentially just like that, but on a grander level. And if the person who's targeting you is using other people or animals or whatever to do it, that makes it even more challenging to have that person be held accountable for their actions. So yeah, no touch torture is essentially just meant to make that person mentally unstable. It's meant to drive them crazy. It's a tactic of psychological warfare that could be, blasting music all day, all night, and then if you do call the police on them, they magically stop, and then as soon as the cops leave, they turn it right back up. It can range from so many different things, but those are just some of the ones that I can think of right off the top of my dome. All right, moving right along. Gang stalking methods of delivery. So this is the area where I told you it's going to have a lot of information. And the methods of delivery are basically how the tactics are executed, meaning that the stalker themselves, the proxies, or the mob can basically conduct the tactics in these manners. So it could look like hacking your electronic devices, phone call slash text harassment, cyber stalking, mail tampering, learning your routine, following you, reckless driving, noise campaigns, intimidation, street theater, trespassing, eavesdropping, destruction of property, copying what you wear, gossiping and spreading rumors about you, character assassination, trackers, kids and pets. So you might be looking at this list and like, man, this is a comprehensive list. No, it's not. This is a non-exhaustive list of some of the methods that can be deployed. I know that there are many more, many, many more, but the ones that I've included, again, are from my personal experience. Some of these I've been able to prove and document and record for my own safety. Some of these are things that got back to me through other third parties. And yeah, all of these things I've experienced. So let's see, just picking one at random. We've already tapped on intimidation a little bit. Let's go to the mail tampering. So at our last residence in San Diego, California, we lived to a neighbor who was guilty of doing such a thing. My family and I were out of town on a trip to the Grand Canyon, and we had placed an order for something, and unfortunately, it didn't arrive before we left for our trip. So, on the last night of our trip, we got notification that our order would be delivered, early that next day. So, we would still be in transit back home when it would arrive. Um, However, that's not what happened. It ended up coming the night previous. We were kind of thrown off by it because we got a notification saying it was coming the next day. But anyway, so the night of, us getting ready to leave, we ended up getting a notification from one of our cameras that we had situated in our window, uh, on our front porch or facing our front porch, just in case it did get delivered at a, wacky hour or time, we would have it there so that we'd know when it got there. And it did arrive earlier that day. And I think it was like around 9, 10, 11 or so. Um, One of those times that we had gotten a notification of someone on our porch. And when we saw the individual, they had like picked up our package and moved it from in front of like our front door. It was posted up against the wall in front of our front door. They picked it up and moved it to a post that is also on our front porch area. And but what was weird was that when they picked it up, they essentially looked like they were gonna walk off with it, but they happened to look back and see that our camera was in the window, and it looked like they kind of panicked and then set it down behind the post. Now, mind you, at the time, my husband nor I knew who this individual was. We thought it was a homeless guy because if you know about California, it's not uncommon to have a lot of homeless, and I know the area that we lived in definitely had homeless in the area, and we didn't recognize the individual because this neighbor in particular, we had never met him before, so we didn't know he was our neighbor actually until after the whole encounter. So my husband and I were ready to, go ahead and call the police and stuff if need be if he would have walked off with it, but he didn't. But we did definitely make sure to record and screenshot him picking up the package and stuff like that. Just in case we still needed to file a report because again, we didn't know if that person was going to come back and try again later. We didn't know. So on our way back home, we ended up seeing that the package was still there, still intact. When we got there, the neighbor next door, their wife, ended up coming out there while we were installing a door camera that we had picked up on our trip and basically had admitted to her husband tampering with our package, using the same or stating basically that, oh, you know, the package was facing the road, so they just wanted to move it out of the view of the road and put it behind the post. Now, mind you, the person who actually moved the package, her husband, was standing right behind her. He never said a word. If anything, he had like this creepy smile on his face the whole time. And basically, my husband was like, "Oh, thanks or whatever." But my husband and I were both like kind of pissed about the situation. I was pissed, so I never turned around. I never acknowledged them. I never said nothing. I just kept, installing our door camera that we had purchased. And I happened to look up at one time when she was speaking and noticed that in the window that the husband had this creepy ass like weirdo smile on his face. So like in that moment I knew in my mind, like, even if they're saying that they're trying to be neighborly or whatever, like, that's, I don't believe that that was the true intentions, and I definitely know that to be true now. But in that moment my husband was just trying to be cordial or whatever, but he was pissed too. And we're just type of people like, hey, we can be neighbors or whatever, but don't fuck with our shit. Like, it's that simple. Especially when we don't know you all that well and we've never asked you to look out for our packages or anything. Because I just thought it was weird in the sense that it's like, how is someone's package being on their doorstep, any of your concern? Because it's not. And at the end of the day, uh, that's how we found out that it was our neighbor who was messing with our package. Um, and we actually had other instances come up where, this particular neighbor and his wife also was eyeballing our packages or messing with our packages because when they had initially moved to our neighborhood, I'd say it was like a month or two after my family moved out there, and I had only introduced myself to the wife in particular, and I again, I had never met the husband. And I remember getting a package, within that first week of her moving out there, and magically, or expecting a package, excuse me, and then magically her package ended up on my door. I guess it was for her husband. So I did the kind thing, and I just walked it over across the yard, to him, and I introduced myself to her and my children. And I could just tell in that instance, speaking to her, that this was someone who, I don't know, like, they just seemed off. It's like, if you know, you know. And I'm a intuitive person, so I pick up on stuff like that really fast about people. And I can be wrong at times, but most of the time I'm not. And so, but I didn't think nothing of it. I was just, hey, your package got delivered in my door. I'll give, here you go. And she, oh, well, thank you. It's actually my husband's package. And oh, yeah. And like, and the whole time she just, again, had that same creepy smile that her husband had, in the story I just told you, same type of weird smile. And I just remember me getting a package later in that week, after that incident or instance. And I was outside, like I probably like a crazy woman now that I think about it, but I was outside stabbing my inflatable punching bag that I had got from me and my boys because we unfortunately just wore the thing out. I say like in 2 weeks time. But anyway, I was stabbing the air out of it, trying to break it down and so I could dump it out or dump it out with water because it had water in the base of it to dump it out and throw it away. And I remember her walking by on the sidewalk, like sniggling and giggling, and oh hey, you got a package. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, oh okay. And I just thought that that was weird. Like all of a sudden, this person, every time, I have a package at my door, like, is this going to be my life now where this person feels like they need to tell me about a package that I have? And this, of course, happened before we got the doorbell. But because I had came outside my home through the garage, I hadn't come out my front door, so I didn't know the package was there. But again, it's just like that whole like I thought like, man, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe she is just trying to be nice or whatever. But I'm like, no, like there was always something behind it. And so the instance and the night of her husband messing with our package kind of confirmed that for me um later on. But I just I recognize that, sometimes people can do the right things with the wrong intentions, just like people can do the wrong things with the right intentions. And again, this couple, that were our neighbors, essentially went on to cause me and my family a lot more headache down the road. But that's just, again, one example of that, the methods of delivery, the mail tampering. Some others would be, let me see here, in terms of children, people using their children, these neighbors are also guilty of that also because they had a toddler that they would oftentimes allow to like run over on our front porch and patio and trigger our door camera. The type of camera we have is a Google Nest camera. So we are allowed to set our zone. If you know, you know. And basically, if anything that we've identified to for it to notify us of comes into that zone, it pings up and gives us a notification. They would oftentimes be outside with their child again. That's not the issue, but it got to a point where it was every time they were outside, their child magically would find themselves on our front porch, and or like up and around our zone area. And again, I don't have little children. I have, a preteen and a teen. So it's like, yeah, like, okay, I get it. If your child get away from you once, maybe twice, but every time you're outside, like, come on now. And so, it just got to the point where it was an annoyance, and I would keep adjusting my zone. So if he did come over, that it wouldn't ping off, but magically, somehow, some way, this child always just knew where to go to trigger that, that zone. And so that's when I started to realize that anytime that my family and I, or more so my husband and I, would go out and like adjust our camera or fix things, magically these same neighbors would be outside or come outside, or other neighbors would start magically walking by and, seemingly interested in what we were doing. And eventually things got so bad to the point where my husband and I just decided to install temporary fencing along our walkway leading up to our front porch because we just got tired of it. It's like we bought the camera to, notify us primarily of when we get packages, and again, just for security measures. But it's like we didn't get them to see your kid on our camera every day. Like, it's like we get it. He's small. He's a toddler. We understand that. But when we see on the camera that every time he triggers it, my camera starts recording. So that means that anything that's happening outside of our zone is being picked up on the camera. And there were a couple of instances where he triggered our camera. There was one time he actually hurt himself when he fell, but anytime that we would review the camera footage, his father nor his mother were nowhere in sight. He was always by himself, essentially. And there was a time or two that um he would like run over, trigger our camera, and then take off for the road. And again, mother and father nowhere in sight. And there was actually a time that caught her chasing after him into the road because he almost got hit. But you would think that that would make them be more vigilant about watching their child, but it didn't. Like from what we could tell from what was recorded from our camera that their child triggered, it never like stopped them to think like, hey, maybe we should set up some type of guard or guardrail or play fence or something so he can't just be running out to the road or running over to our neighbor's house. And it's that whole like we never said anything. We just put up our parameters and stuff like that because again, we get it. He's a baby. It's not that we had an issue with the baby. It's just a matter of knowing that every day our kids are being triggered by these people's child. And we just thought it was weird because again, it's that whole, well, if you're so called trying to quote unquote look out for us and looking after our mail and all this stuff, then why couldn't you possibly understand that concept that, we just want our personal space. We give you and your family your personal space. We just like the same. It's common courtesy. But these type of people were again just not uh picking up on stuff like that. And I get it, it may have been my husband's bad for not just outright saying how we felt in those moments. Instead, we just chose to ignore it for the most part. And then also just, instead of reacting, we just responded, like I said, with like putting up the little fencing. Because again, it was never something that we had against the baby per se. I don't want to say I hate babies because not that's not the case at all. But it was just a matter, it's like, hey, when you've been a mother as long as I've been a mother and I have the type of children that I have that are older, it's like, I don't want to feel responsible for have to watch other people's children. You get what I'm saying? Like, especially for people I don't know. And that was always my concern. Was like, what if he gets hurt over here? Thank God, where we live, we're required to have renter's insurance. And of course we did have insurance, but it's like, yeah, but that'll fall on us. You get what I'm saying? Somehow, some way. And that was another one of my concerns with all that. So, that was an instance where, like I said, this their neighbors were using their child. And again, it didn't just stop at them using their child, it also included them using other people's children, other neighborhood children within the neighborhood, because there's, again, several instances of this that I have documented of them, allowing their friends who would come and visit them from within the neighborhood, walking across our driveway or our front porch area to trigger our cameras. And again, this went on for quite some time. So, I believe in that whole, okay, once, maybe an accident, twice, you're pushing it third time. No, you're doing that ish on purpose. So again, we recognize it was just a way for these people to try to get a rise out of us because they obviously could see that it did bother us, but because I guess we never just came out and just yelled at nobody or cussed nobody out or nothing like that. I guess they thought it was okay to continue that behavior, but I also believe that adults are all old enough to know better. And I personally don't feel like I should have to tell another grown person that what they're doing, they need to stop what they're doing because it's like that's kind of elementary type of stuff, like if your parents didn't instill that in you or teach that to you about, respecting people's personal space and boundaries, then it's kind of like, well, that's where you got failed in my opinion, like, because I no one has to tell me, hey, if I bother somebody peace one time, guess what? You ain't got to worry about it again. Like I know I'm gonna fix myself. I'm gonna correct that, and or if it's like my children or whatever, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna correct it. But these people, like I said, became habitual, boundary breakers. They didn't respect our part of the space that we shared. They didn't care about none of that. And that was apparent, and that became very clear um, into the years that we went to live there. So, like I said, that's, children, unfortunately, can sometimes be used as pawns. And I know me personally, I don't respect people who use children as pawns because I would never do that. And I've never done that. Use my children to harass someone, like, especially an adult, like, that just really says a lot about you and your character. And that's just something I don't get down with. But yeah, like I'm sure others of you might have similar stories of people using their children. And again, to the outsider looking in, it could sound like I'm just being a crabby, cantankerous, lady. Oh, she don't like babies. Like, absolutely not. It's not that at all. But when people allow the same behaviors to take place over and over and over, baby, that's a pattern. That's not an accident. As people might try to play it off. Like, people know what they're doing, especially these adults, so-called adults. They know what they're doing. The children will always get that area of grace from me because again, they're still learning. But even some of them know better. They just choose to continue to double down on the behavior, especially when you have your parents, hyping you up or condoning that behavior. Then yeah, it's easy for, those little children to grow up to be like those adults. And unfortunately, I experienced a lot of that from children initially, and then it grew to the adults, I guess, finally growing a backbone and doing some of those things themselves. But yeah, these tactics can be a little hard to navigate, and that's where I kept running into certain roadblocks because when I finally did get an opportunity to speak up for myself and ask these particular neighbors in question to stop harassing my family and just leave us be, um it wasn't received well. If anything, the behaviors only amped up, and then next thing I knew, I'm having like parades of people parading through, my lawn and or my section of the lawn, which was considered communal area, which again I recognize that, but you get what I mean, like coming into our personal premises, like our driveway, our walkway leading up to our patio or to our front porch and stuff, just disrespecting our space and with their animals, and it was a whole thing. And those particular neighbors orchestrated a lot of it. Again, back to the by proxy and the mobbing. I have documentation of a time that they held some type of gathering on their little side of the lawn, or and it was multiple individuals with their littles and grown people, and they were kicking balls up against our home, and just basically just trying to do a lot to disturb my peace and my children's peace. And of course, I'm just sitting in my house per usual, minding my business. And I just started getting an influx of notifications coming through on my phone, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And mind you, this was like after me and my sons had just come back from the park. We were just, minding our business. And shortly after coming home from the park, then we're hearing, getting all these notifications and hearing all this fanfare outside. And so we didn't think nothing of it because these neighbors were also phenomenally known for always having, gatherings and stuff towards the end of our stay there. And so when I started getting all the notifications, my husband also was receiving these notifications. And, I called him and I was like, hey, are you getting this? He's like, yeah. He's like, what the heck is going on? I'm like, babe, I'm like, I don't know. And I just was, just watching on my camera some of the stuff that it was picking up. And it's just a bunch of kids running through, yelling, screaming, playing. And I'm like, okay, maybe they're having a birthday party or something. Okay, cool, whatever. But it was to a point where these people were using that gathering to find themselves on my patio. Like, there was a man who followed his daughter up to my literal front door and was like, oh yeah, come here, baby, come here. And I'm like, okay, like, again, I get it, your littles are getting away from you, but I'm like, it's a gang of adults outside. But magically all the adults were standing in the driveway trying to basically shield themselves from my camera, which I thought was weird because again, I'm like, how you keep yourself off my camera? Just keep yourself and your children out of my zone. You won't be on my camera because the way that my camera was set up, it didn't record anything outside the zone unless the zone was triggered. So if you never triggered my zone, you didn't have to worry about being on my camera. So I just thought that that was odd that, people want to hide from the camera that they're actively allowing their children to trigger. So, and I knew just based on some other things that had taken place before this event that these people were doing it as a way of retaliating against me specifically. And I'll get more into that as the series goes on, but these people were, trying to make a point, I guess that, they're there to stay and, their kids can go wherever they want. Because that's pretty much the idea and the theme that I got was like, hey, you can't tell our kids where to go, where to be, or whatever. Mind you, I've never said anything to anyone's child, not once. The entire time I lived out there, I've never said ill word to any of their children in a manner that would have been inappropriate or whatever. I've never even really been around these people's children. But it's just a matter that all of these people always had to show up and try to gang up towards me and my family, just help me to grow to become who I am right now and realize that we're actually stronger than we think we are. That this many people had to show up to try to, ruin our day, essentially. But the funny thing is, in them trying to do that, my camera caught a couple of their children again running towards the road, chasing after a ball, almost getting hit again. So I just thought that that was interesting. I'm like, imagine that you're sitting here trying to annoy and pester a neighbor who's done nothing to you, doesn't know you from Adam when it comes to these other individuals who got themselves involved. That you almost, a lot of you almost getting your own children's lives taken away because y'all are trying to serve someone else. Like, how does that make sense? You're literally putting your own children's lives and livelihood at risk trying to bother and pester somebody. Isn't that crazy? Like, that's just, it's nutso, in my opinion. But yeah, and how I know these neighbors orchestrated all that, because again, at the end of the video, or at the end of the numerous videos that I have from that event, those same two neighbors magically were missing out of the frame most of the videos when they would go off. But then at the end, they all gathered together staring at my front door, which is where my camera was, as if to like look like, well, dang, we thought that would have got her. We thought, she would have came out and said something and had a meltdown and but I didn't. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I just ignored it in the moment and I just documented like, hey, if anything would have got damaged, I have the people's faces and their names and all that stuff because some of the children were wearing jerseys. So yeah, I was able to record all that stuff. But also I recognize again, since they're using children to do their, their bidding essentially, that what could I really ultimately do? Without looking like a whack job because I know how it sounds. And I know some of you might be, thinking, "Oh, well, you're still reaching." Okay. Well, if you feel that way, I implore you to keep following this series and to keep watching because things get even crazier as time goes on. All right, so some other examples that I don't mind discussing would be like, let's say, the street theater. So you might be wondering, what is street theater? Street theater is essentially people putting on a show anytime you show up, and that can manifest in a range of ways. So, for example, you know, some that I experience is anytime I come outside, they come outside. Or if I go inside, they go inside. If I open my blinds a certain way, they open their blinds a certain way. If I wear a certain color, they're wearing that certain color. I mean, just, people going out of their way to make sure you see them, by copying and mimicking what you do, what you wear, maybe even some things you've said, maybe even talking about some of the things that you talk about. Like, yeah, street theater. Just putting on a show to let you know they're there. Um, Another one I like to, I guess, briefly give an example of would be, I guess they kind of go hand in hand, but gossiping and rumors and character assassination. So this is something I'm sure we all are pretty familiar with, just because it's so commonplace. A lot of time these days, it's no thing for people to get on the internet and immediately slander folks. in the moment, when things don't go their way or something has happened to them or whatever. Whereas a person like myself, like that's not necessarily my MO or forte. I know you might be thinking like, wait, isn't that what you're doing right now? I'm like, no, because what I'm doing is to inform, is to educate, and it's for entertainment. I'm not doing it because I want any hurt, harm, or danger to come to these individuals because I believe in karma, and karma knows everyone's address. So I don't have to do anything, and nor do you. So please, don't. If you thinking about stuff like that, don't even worry about it. Like I said in one of my videos, what was that? Don't get even, just move on. And that's exactly what I've done. And it's only now that, doing the healing and the inner self work from these situations that I can even talk about it. Because in the moment when I was experiencing these things, it was hard for me to talk about. But now, like I said, I'm no longer in that situation, in that particular position, so I can talk about these things. And of course, I'm making careful mention not to mention any names or any specific descriptors that might identify these people because, again, I don't want to give them any shine. I don't want to give them any energy. That's what they want from me, is acknowledgement. And I don't even seek to acknowledge them in that manner. Um, and again, whatever we give our energy to is what persists. So no, I'm not gonna even worry about that. So going on, I later learned throughout a lot of these ordeals that I had found myself faced with in my family that we were being slandered and gossiped about through certain avenues, social media, Facebook groups. I'm pretty sure they probably got their own little personal chat and all these things about me specifically. And I know firsthand account, my son unfortunately has overheard these, similar neighbors in particular discussing me and calling me out my name and saying that I was fat and that they weren't quote unquote doing anything to me and blah blah blah. And it just goes to show you that even being a person who tries to live in their own little bubble and stay to themselves and just keep your own peace, that it still triggers people. And that's pretty much the vibe I got from these people, is that they were triggered that myself and my family just we didn't want to be involved with them at all. And what's the fastest way to get other people to believe that you're the victim in all of it, not recognizing that you're actually the antagonist, you're actually the bully in all of the stuff going on, than by playing the victim and spreading rumors and gossip about people and taking situations that may have transpired between us and inflating it and making it to be on such a larger scale, because that's definitely something that I noticed towards the end of us moving, that even when some of these older neighbors who originally were taking part of some of this stuff had moved out, these newer neighbors are moving in and then instantly jumping into the mix and doing the same type of behaviors I observed from these older neighbors. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't even know these people. Like, what beef could you have with me? I don't even know you. I've not done anything to you. I've not said anything to you. If it, without thinking like, hey, that means people are probably still talking about us or still talking about, old stuff, because a lot of these things that transpired between me and these and one other, like I'd say, neighbor that I know for a fact that we actually did have, a disagreement, was darn near what this month November makes 2 years. Happened almost 2 years ago, and they're still going on about it. Still. So, in one instance, I was actually told by, like I said, a mutual party who witnessed some of the slander online and stuff like that, and they would run back and tell me, or show me some of the stuff that was being said. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, again, it's not my responsibility to, you know, change someone's mind about how they feel about me. It really doesn't hold any weight in my life. But I just was like, okay, good to know. Like, it confirmed my suspicions that I already pretty much knew, because again, I'm an intuitive type of person. I can always pick up on if someone doesn't like me. It isn't hard to really read if you pay attention. I pick up on body language is a very big giveaway when it comes to a lot of people. And you know how it's that saying like, hey, even if you don't say it, your face will tell it. Like it's kind of like that. Like it's written all over their faces a lot of times, whether it be, that they don't like you because they think you've done something to them or their friend or whatever, or if it's just that they don't like you just because, like I said in those earlier or that earlier video, if it's envy or jealousy or infatuation or whatever it might be. And people aren't as cunning as they like to think that they are in hiding those feelings, because I know for me for a fact, like if I don't like you, you're gonna know it. And it's not because I go out of my way to make sure I don't like you. It's just that my face tells it, a lot of the time. My face, tells how I feel a lot of the times before anything else. And that's how I've always been. I'm one of these type of people. I'm not gonna fake the funk and act like I like you if I don't like you. I'm gonna, do you and me the respect of just leaving you alone and staying to myself. And that's oftentimes what I do. I choose not to do any harm if I can, and I just stay to myself because that's the best way I can be. That's the best way I can keep my own self out of drama and issues and stuff like that, or at least so I thought. But I know, like I said, in these days and times, it doesn't take much for someone to have something against you. It does, it really just, it doesn't have to make sense. And I implore you, like, if you're someone, if you're a TI and you're asking yourself, well, what did I do? What did I say? Baby, oftentimes you didn't do or say anything. So just know, like, these people are wackadoos. Like, don't feed in to the gossip and the character slander. Like, baby, it don't matter what they got to say, as long as you know who you are. That's all that matters. And I'm a old country girl, and my grandma saying things like, baby, it don't matter what people call you, it's what you answer to. And that's how I choose to look at it. All right, so if you've made it this far, you've made it to the end of the video. I'd like to thank you for sticking around and listening to this installment of the Game Stalker series. The last little thing I wanted to shine a little spotlight on is my little most wanted page. I decided to play around with AI for the first time and just see what I could come up with to try to sort of recreate some of the instances of tactics and methods of delivery that I've experienced. Some of them I've mentioned in this particular video, and some of them I have not. Um, just know that none of these are of real people. All of this is AI generated, but I have to say it did a pretty good bang up job for my first time using it. Not gonna highlight any one specific, image or whatever that you see, just because, again, in due time, a lot of the stuff will be talked about, and you could always come back to this video for reference to kind of try to tie it to the specific image that you see. But again, it's not of any particular person or place or whatever. So I just more so put it here for just imagery reasons and to try to paint a picture of some of the stuff I've spoken about or will be speaking about. And I just kind of hope you get a kick out of that because I sure had a whole lot of fun creating it. But yeah, the end of this video is pretty much done, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But for those of you who are invested in sticking out to the very end to see how this installment of this series concludes, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Like I said, I have much more information to share and experiences to share. I hope that with each of these videos, someone is being able to take something from it to either grow encouraged to speak about, maybe similar experiences that they've had that they want to empower and encourage other people with, like myself, or maybe even to help point people to resources like I intend to do. If you stick around to the end of the series, I too plan to provide some resources to help any individuals that find themselves in similar situations. But yeah, this has been the end of video 2, and thank you for listening. And check back in next week. I hope to have installment 3 uploaded and ready to go for you guys. Until then, see ya.